Almost 100 million babies will come into the world this year. The rate increases. More babies mean finally still more babies. When these have reached the age of 40, the world will have doubled its numbers. Helpless, harmless infants, but by their numbers and by their needs, part of a possible danger for mankind. Danger from a child, from new life, something cherished by all people everywhere? Yes. Because ours is a hungry world. 1/2 of humanity has less than enough to eat. How are we to feed the new millions who arrive each year? Population and food supply, a subject that haunts the minds of thoughtful men and women everywhere. By many, it's considered the major crisis of our time, next to the threat of atomic war. Some think it's an even greater danger. I've spoken to one authority at the United Nations who says, in the end, the womb may prove more dangerous than the bomb. These are harsh words. They serve to describe the coming crisis in population and food supply that's aptly called the population explosion. The heart of the problem is the fact that the rate of human growth can be truly fantastic. One expert has illustrated this human multiplication in a striking illustration. Let's assume that the human race began with Adam and Eve in the year 4004 BC. If their descendants increased at the rate of 1% annually, the population would have increased by the year 1900 BC to 4 billion people. And at the beginning of the Christian era, there would have been standing room only on the entire land surface of the earth. Well, humanity didn't explode then, but it's begun to do so in our time. We're increasing right now at the rate of 1.6% annually. In the last 60 years, we've doubled our numbers. We'll double that again, not in 60 years, but in 40. Double that population again in approximately 25 years, and so on. More people mean even more people. Obviously, the explosion is underway. Standing room only in this world of ours is possible. Some experts say it could happen in 200 to 300 years. A more conservative opinion, in 600 years. Now, the state of the world in 600 years or even 100 years is something that people living today may not feel too alarmed about, but they should. The population explosion has immediate dangers for us and for our children. How has this sudden acceleration in human growth happened? Well, it's not so much a matter of more births as fewer early deaths. More people are living longer. This is because we've changed nature's control of human numbers. In the past, up to fairly recent times, natural controls limited the rate of human increase. Nature killed, in many ways, by flood. Through all human memory, water, the giver of life, has also been a destroyer, taking life and the means of life. Those who survived death by drowning usually faced death by starvation because the fields and crops were ruined. If not by flood, possibly by drought. In one corner of the world, too much water. In another, too little. But the end was the same: devastation, ruined crops, no food for man or for beast, famine. When the soil died, man died. Long before the airplane and the bomb, death came from the sky. Plagues of locusts, winged killers in their millions, sweeping in on the trees and plants, devouring everything in their path. The armies of locusts were instruments of divine wrath, primitive people thought. Some still do. The gods have been angered, and so punish the people by sending locusts to sweep the earth clean. Or perhaps the angel of death would come, bearing disease. The dread plagues, the Black Death. Aided and abetted by superstition, ignorance, and primitive filth, these frightful epidemics swept away towns, cities, whole regions. People died in hundreds, in thousands, in tens of thousands, in all ages, in all regions, through all the known world. There was no escape, no protection, no cure. In the year 1665 in London, a small town then, there were 97,306 deaths. 68,000 of these deaths were attributed to bubonic plague. Death triumphant, the symbol, most people thought, of divine retribution, something to be met only by prayer and incantation. But always, throughout all civilizations, there were a few who thought otherwise, who looked to natural causes for the source of disease. Of course, there were quacks and charlatans, false doctors who killed far more often than they cured. But there were also the true doctors, and they slowly learned more and more about the human body and its workings. Though science and medicine were starting to come to grips with disease and death, ignorance was still dominant. Medicine was irrational rather than rational. Public attitudes toward medical care and theory were also irrational. New ideas were met with fear and hostility. Louis Pasteur and his methods of immunization were ridiculed and attacked on religious grounds as unnatural and evil. An American doctor inoculated his son and touched off a storm of criticism. There were riots, beatings, and violent denunciations in the press. Cartoons were used to condemn the new ideas. One showed people with animal heads springing from their bodies because they'd been inoculated with serum taken from animals. The progressive doctor was held up as a vicious, lunatic experimenter who deserved to be treated by animals as he was thought to treat them. Of course, the ridicule and hostility eventually vanished. Immunization was proven effective, and inoculation became a standard practice, not only as a measure of personal protection, but also as a social duty to prevent the spread of disease. This concept of social responsibility and acceptance of health regulation took solid root in more recent years. A graphic example of organized action in the face of an epidemic can be seen in this record of a Manchurian outbreak of plague in 1911. There were 60,000 deaths, but there could have been many times that number. Houses were burned, bodies were burned. The methods were crude by contemporary standards, but comparatively effective, and a far cry from despair or hysteria or superstition. Death no longer triumphant, no longer the symbol of unknown and uncontrollable disease. We now know a great deal about disease, and that knowledge is spreading. The student nurse in South America learns how to stamp out infections that would, and perhaps did, kill her grandfather. Medical colleges now exist in almost every corner of the globe. Still far too few, many, many more are needed. But the numbers grow slowly, and the knowledge spreads. Knowledge of hygiene and sanitation, acquired by social workers, district nurses, health inspectors, all working with the doctor and the nurse to hold back death, prolong life. Baby clinics to find disease, to prevent disease. Spearheading the worldwide spread of medical skills are the specialists of the World Health Organization. They and their students are people of all races and tongues. In the years that WHO has been at work, millions of children and adults have been saved from blindness, deformity, malaria, cholera, yellow fever. These new frontiers of healing are often crude in appearance and facilities, but they represent something new in human experience, an expanding worldwide structure of clinics and health systems, local, national, and through WHO, international. In effect, the foundations of a worldwide health system. In less than one generation, great victories over disease and death have been won. A single injection of penicillin will cure yaws, a foul disease suffered by 50 million people just 10 years ago. Today, the end of yaws is in sight. X-ray detection of tuberculosis, so familiar in Western societies, is spreading to almost every country in the world. Insect control. In Africa, workers collect specimens of the tsetse fly, carrier of sleeping sickness. When enough is known about this fly, the disease it carries may be eradicated, or at least controlled. This is now the case with the malaria-carrying mosquito. Since 1945, malarial areas have been sprayed with DDT and other chemicals. The result? Nearly 300 million people now protected from malaria, once the greatest of all killer diseases. Water tests for typhoid, another great killer that can be brought under control. In field tests in rice paddies, in clinics and hospitals, in laboratories, research, treatment, cure. still, so much remains to be done. World health workers have found that there are even greater shortages and more problems than was realized only a few years ago. They now know the extent of world facilities for medical care, and these are terribly limited. Burma, for instance, has one hospital bed for every 10,000 people. Canada, by comparison, has a bed for every 77 people. Indonesia, one doctor for every 70,000 people. The United States, a doctor for every 800 people, and so on. Nevertheless, a tremendous volume of human life is now being saved and prolonged to a natural span of years. Unquestionably, a magnificent achievement. But it helps create the new problem, the population explosion. Most acute in the older countries, but now affecting the new countries. For example, New York City, a metropolis of 10 million people. The buildings grow higher and the city canyons deeper. And New York has become the most crowded center on the North American continent. Every daylight hour, the streets are filled with torrents of people jostling, crowding, living in a welter of noise and congestion. Population pressure in North America's large cities is not yet truly critical in terms of living space and food supply. Their people are fairly prosperous. They're housed fairly well. They eat fairly well. By Asian standards, they're immensely rich. But urban crowding has created many problems. Juvenile crime, shortage of schools and classrooms, and of course, the insane tangles of traffic. These really are problems of abundance, of privilege. They're not life and death problems, at least not yet. North Americans still have some element of choice. Most, or many, don't need to crowd into the big centers. People can live, and for that matter, work outside the cities. They still have space, vastly more livable living space than almost any other part of the world. Europe has less space. It has more cities, more urban sprawls, more dwellings and factories, and of course, more people. Their places of work and homes radiate out from every city. The countryside is being blotted out by the cities. London has now spread some 25 miles in almost every direction from its center. There too, the cities teem with people jostling and crowding. Europe has all the problems of congestion, including the space-devouring automobile. Overcrowding in homes, streets, colleges, and schools. Most European countries have a lower rate of population increase than the world average of 1.6%. Even so, population growth is outstripping facilities needed to keep up with it. The greatest human concentration is in Asia, in such cities as Hong Kong, Singapore, Calcutta, and dozens of others. All the coastal areas of China, Indonesia, and India are packed with people, more than 400 to the square mile. In North America, in the most crowded eastern areas, there are only 180 to the square mile. The rate of increase for Asia is less than one would expect, about the same rate as North America. And India has an even lower rate than Europe. But the increase in numbers is enormous. More people mean more people, the compound interest of the human race. The multitudes of Asia have filled the cities and the land to overflowing. There's intense competition for living space and food, competition for work, for the means to buy living space and food. Many millions lack these means, have no homes of any kind. They live in the streets. Many were born there. Many have and will continue to die there. This intense and explosive population pressure is rapidly building up in the Western Hemisphere. Latin America now has the greatest rate of population increase of all. In the next 40 years, this region will more than double its numbers. In Latin America, in Asia, in Africa, in Europe, everywhere in the world, more and yet more human beings. Can people go elsewhere? Is migration one answer to the population pressure? It has been in the past for some people. Europeans have migrated to the newer countries in numbers. But the flow has lessened through the years. And what about India and China? Even if the new countries would accept mass migration from non-white countries, this would not begin to solve the population explosion. Nature was never completely in control of population. Man assisted nature. He very often decimated his kind in war. War accomplished two things: a chance of acquiring new wealth, new resources, and also a reduction of population pressure through the destruction of human beings. This ancient method is as old as man himself, and while he deplores it, he's still capable of using it. We've experienced the method quite recently. Remember? They called it destiny, or national right, or Lebensraum. But by any name, it was deliberate war of aggression. With all the fine phrases, with all the propaganda, with all the pretense of justice and moral right, the true purpose was quite simply to take living space and resources from someone else by force. War has always meant suffering and death for other than soldiers. Civilians have always been uprooted, displaced by war. War devastates town and countryside, and the people scatter and flee. "33 million people died through war between 1939 and 1945. Not many people died by violence compared to those who died in the war that followed the war, the battle for food. Starvation killed far more people than bombs, but the bombs created the starvation. If not war, if not mass migration, if not disaster and pestilence, then what? What can avert the looming crisis in population and food supply? Well, a great many solutions, or part solutions, have been offered by many people, including some of the best minds in the world. Mainly, they propose steps to secure more food and less people. Biologists, chemists, and many other scientists believe that we can develop new sources of food and new kinds of food. They say the sea can give us more food, that we can develop large areas of new land. But many among these experts warn us that there are limits to the world's resources. There's only so much land mass, so much fresh water, so much timber, coal, oil, minerals of all kinds. As to less people, well, there we encounter one of the most contentious issues of our time. Many authorities and some whole nations are in favor of direct population control, birth control. These advocates say we have no choice, that we must sooner or later limit world population. A wide range of opponents of birth control say that this is impossible, immoral, or irreligious. All these questions are vast and complex, difficult to understand and judge. We invite you to make your judgment as we discuss them on coming programs. Thank you.